Because Mike, I think we're live.
We're live, and all of a sudden, I'm doing the two screen thing, and my second screen started yelling at me. I don't know what's happening.
Wow, has it become sentient?
On Facebook that we're live.
Can't rule it out.
Oh, and I'm getting feedback from everybody. This is probably our strongest start in hotlou happy hour history. What do you think?
This literally couldn't have gone worse for us. All right, that was on me. That was on Facebook. Lunatics, I'm very sorry. I was trying to get ready to share my screen, which I'd have to remind Lou to do anyway.
Yeah, we'll see if we can botch that part of the interview too, because we're probably reaching a whole new audience today. We're reaching a bunch of ultimate players to talk about politics. I'm kind of thrilled to see what ends up happening here.
Yeah, thank you to all the new lunatics who joined us. The show is usually this awkward to start out.
Actually, I think we're running a little bit more smoothly than normal, to be honest.
That's probably fair. That's probably fair.
Okay, well, in light of that, why don't we start the show, Mike?
Hit it.
All right. I'm so glad that worked, by the way. Welcome to hotlou Happy Hour. I am your host, Louis Abramowski, or somewhat ultimately known as hotlou.
I am back with my virtual background that looks like me as a bat, Mike Franklin.
Well, I'm kind of excited because you, prior to the rebrand to Mike Loaf, you were Hot Mike number 3. As a play on words of us having multiple hot mics in the room, meaning the actual thing that we talk into. So now we have 4 hot mics and a hot Ike on the show.
Oh, Mike and Ike. I love what we're doing today.
I really like that a lot. I might have to use that sometime.
This makes all sense.
Perfect. And you can send the royalties in to make your checks written out to hotlou Happy Hour. I'm sure they'll get cashed somewhere. But yeah, we're super excited to have Isaac Saul on the show. He is an ultimate player who's made a name for himself within the ultimate playing community at the highest competitive levels, pro and club and world, blah, blah, blah. But we're also interested in talking to him because he created what I think is a very unique newsletter in the news and politics space. So A, welcome to the show, Isaac. And B,
thanks for having me.
How badly did I butcher your intro?
No, I think that's a pretty good intro. I don't rarely get to bring up Frisbee accomplishments in like a professional career setting. So I'm totally thrilled and happy to be able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone in that sense, for sure. It's good for my ego every now and then, man.
As a non-ultimate player, I have found that ultimate players frequently inject the fact that they're ultimate players into
Yeah, no, that's not your imagination. That's definitely true.
Yeah, we're not quite like the CrossFitters, but we certainly are up there, no doubt.
Thank God for all of that.
Yeah, so I think we will get into a couple of little ultimate chats here and there, kind of as we talk, because we've got maybe about, 35 minutes or so to chat with you. But let's just start with what inspired you to start this newsletter? And if you wouldn't mind, could you also refine my intro a little bit? I know you've got a good little 1 sentence on it, but maybe you can add even a little bit more context about what the newsletter is as you talk about, what inspired you to kind of create it in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. So I have been a politics reporter for about 6 or 7 years now, professionally. I was a sports editor for the school paper at the University of Pittsburgh and wrote a lot about sort of the intersection of politics and sports as like a columnist and stuff there. And, from my experience in the space as a politics reporter, I've come to learn and realize firsthand that everybody in the country is basically getting their information from 2 different places. And that's really not good. That's like a really bad thing, is that we are basically living in two different realities now. And people talk about this a lot, but I think that the situation is actually a lot worse than even people who are worried about it think it is. And I experienced this firsthand by, my first job was at the Huffington Post, which is a news outlet well known for being lefty. And yeah, and I didn't work at Huffington Post because of any particular political ideology. I worked there because I applied to 200 places and they gave me an interview and I got a job, and getting a job in media is really hard. But after I left, anytime I'd engage someone on Twitter, anytime I'd publish a story, if I'd written something or the story reflected poorly on conservatives or anybody on the right, and somebody came across the story, they'd Google my name, they'd see I'd worked at the Huffington Post, and they'd say, that's a, liberal trash paper, and this is a liberal trash reporter, and I don't trust anything he's saying. And I was like, it didn't matter how good the story was or how balanced it was written. I was disqualified from the start. And that struck me as being extraordinarily bad and dangerous for the country. And so I had this idea that I wanted to build something basically that people across the political spectrum could read and enjoy and endorse. And that thing is Tangle. And the reason that it's that, and the reason it's been so successful, is because I'm really explicit about who I'm quoting and who's saying this and whose side I'm representing. And then I'm really explicit about what's my take. And then I'm really explicit about sort of what the basic factual outlines of the story are. And people like that. They want to hear the best arguments from both sides. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to do.
Right on. And I knew Mike was just chomping at the bit to jump in, but I wanted to make one comment right before Mike shares. Oh, this is an awesome infographic. And I think this is maybe the observation I wanted to make here, because it's been running through my head now for maybe like a day or two as I knew that we were going to be talking. Because one of the things that I notice on your website where people can subscribe, and I'm just going to throw it out there right now, people can go to tangle.substack.com to subscribe, and we'll definitely include that in the show notes. But you describe it as an independent, ad-free, non-partisan politics newsletter that offers both sides of the biggest news stories every day. And I think what has been running through my head, because as I was promoting that you'd be joining us here today, the word both was kind of nagging at me, specifically because I think I changed that to something like multiple or all perspectives. And because I the word divisive, in fact, just means dividing into two, right? Like, you divide it, and, one division creates two sides or two components to one thing. But often I think it looks more like something with, multiple vectors here, right? Like what Mike's showing. And I think Mike's going to jump in here, but maybe you can kind of talk about, I don't know if you put a lot of thought into that word both, or if you think a lot about that as you write and share, and what that means to you as kind of reporting this stuff.
No, I absolutely do. And you're not the first person to bring that up. And I am actually currently in the process of building a new website that I'm basically building a new landing page and moving off the platform on now to host a new website. And I am going to change the tagline, actually, precisely for the reason that you just raised, which is that I think it's reinforcing this idea that there are only two sides, which is really the thing that I'm trying to break down and tear apart. And I think it's an interesting commentary on, even someone trying to fix this problem, how innate and embedded that idea is, even for me. But the point really is that there's a ton of nuance, like I am, I think most Americans would consider me to be left of center. I don't totally know what that means so much anymore in today's political world, because the Overton windows changing and where people are and what it means to be
I
conservative.
have to point out 2 days in a row with a reference to the Overton window. I think you're a lost soul brother or something here.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I think when I reform that, I'm going to probably change it to something like the best arguments about the biggest story of the day, something along those lines, because I think that, more appropriately reflects what I'm trying to do. Now, it's a simple fact of nature that in politics, everybody gets in line on their side. So I do think there's validity in framing it, like how the left's framing something, how the right's framing something. But I absolutely think that, people are really nuanced. The thing I get most from readers is like, I am so grateful to be reading something that's not A, telling me how I'm supposed to feel, and B, isn't like putting me as a Republican in this tiny little box where like I'm an idiot who only cares about money and I have no empathy. And like you are reflecting what I think are real views that most conservatives in America hold. And that's been really interesting for me is like, I'm someone who I am very left on an issue like police reform. That's something I'm conscious of the fact that I'm hold really left views on. But on the issue of guns, I think I'm to the right of a lot of my friends who are lefties. And so it's there's a mix.
Yeah.
Thank you for being a complicated person who can hold various viewpoints and maybe even can be persuadable to change those viewpoints over time by engaging with people who are maybe of a different mindset than you. Because I've found that, I've been on the right or the center right for my entire adult life. And like you said, or to paraphrase you, I don't really know what that means. But separating how complicated politics can be, and just as an aside, like, we could do a whole show just talking about how police reform is complicated. I mean, I'm surrounded by libertarians who are, most of people would be considered on the center right, who would have almost identical recommendations to many of the people on the left with respect to police reforms.
And have been calling for those reforms for about 40 years now. Absolutely. They're not new to the party. They've been hammering this for decades.
And so, and I love that. And I've on this show before, I've blamed TV news for sort of the dumbing down of America. And that's totally an overbroad statement, but I mean, we'll get into sort of media bias. And I've had this chart up for a while. I don't know whether it's right or wrong. I kind of a little bit find it helpful, but I think that it's absolutely, and we'll get into the New York Times, so which does not belong in the Overton window anymore, as far as I'm concerned. And we'll get to Barry Weiss, so kind of the news of the day, as far as that goes. But what you shouldn't need that chart. And what's been shocking to me over basically the last 20 years of my career, which is to say my career, how journalism, it seems to me today that there are very few journalists, and then I'll just keep my comments to political journalists, although you can see this now in sports journalists, business journalists, environmental journalists, seem not to even care to present the lack of bias. That they sort of, I don't want to do it right now. I will get into Barry Weiss, but she said it better than I could, that for them, for so many journalists today, it seems like truth is something that they hold and they are in charge of just giving to the people. In other words, they're a priest. They're not a journalist. They're a priest. They're not seeking truth. They're evangelizing truth. What I really appreciate, and there's actually two, before I had heard of Tangle, there's a different one that I found, Daily News Digest, that sort of reject that and throw it out and basically say, there are multiple sides to these issues. It's not necessarily my job to tell you which one's right or wrong. We're just going to give it to you. And then in yours, in Tangle, it's also, and then let's engage about it. And I do appreciate that you're sort of, you've got a little opinion piece in there that sort of bracketed and said, here's how I'm analyzing this, tell me where I'm wrong. And I there's no reason that shouldn't be the case. I find it refreshing that a political journalist would do that. and basically not try to put a whole category of people or a variety of categories of people into a box that needs to basically fit their narrative. I just threw a lot at you. I'm sorry, but I'm appreciating what I'm hearing, and I'm very frustrated basically on a day-to-day basis with the way the news attempts to, my judgment, push a particular narrative or, set of narratives based on, where they're coming from.
Yeah. And it's not just you. And I'll tell you something interesting about doing this and running this newsletter and making a really concerted effort to engage with readers is what I've realized is, I don't want to put a number on this, but I would say maybe 75% of the conservatives, people who say they're right of center or far right, who sign up for the paper, sign up for the newsletter, say they're reading Tangle because they've just totally lost all trust in the news and in political journalism. And they can't even read the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post anymore without seeing things that stick out to them.
Or Fox News. I mean, if you're Fox News about it, I mean, there's you look at this and you go, well, all right, I don't need this, but in reverse.
Yeah, totally. Like I have people who are Trump supporters who have written to me and said, I am so tired of watching Fox News and being pissed off and then realizing after the fact that I'm just sort of being misled. I mean,
or reading the New York Times and being pissed on.
Right. Yeah. And those people are out there and they really feel that way. And then when people who are left of center sign up, almost always what they're telling me is they want to better understand the right's arguments because they're like, I'm watching Fox News and it's all bullshit. And I don't understand why anybody believes this. And I'm sensing that there must be something more to like a conservative viewpoint on America than what I'm getting. And then they read my newsletter where I'm seeking out what I think are the best arguments on an issue. And people are like, oh, you know what? I can actually see the point here. This makes some sense to me. And they feel sort of like a sense of empathy and understanding with these people they're engaging online, which is like, in my opinion, extremely important for where the country is right now, because I don't think we have any of that. I think people are basically have decided, it's like the number one thing that's dividing America right now is not race or religion or sex, it's political views. And I think that might be a controversial thing to say, but it's totally reflected in the data of polling. People are going to think lower about someone based on them having opposing political views in them over anything else.
We could do 10 shows, and maybe we will. But I do want to just bring up this Bari Weiss, who I've been familiar with for years as sort of a centrist left commentator at the New York Times. I mean, I've read stuff of hers that I totally disagree with. I've read stuff of hers that I totally agree with. And I didn't realize this had happened. I was walking to go get a refill of water for this show, and I saw on the TV that she resigned from the New York Times. And this letter that she issued is chilling. Just talking about being called, she's Jewish, by the way, being called a Nazi by her colleagues in the paper. And, she's writing about the Jews again, which apparently is a subject she writes about an awful lot. And I've read some of it, but just this one I think there are two paragraphs in here that really grabbed me. The lessons that ought to have followed the election, this being the 2016 election, lessons about the importance of understanding other Americans, the necessity of resisting tribalism, and the centrality of the free exchange of ideas to a democratic society have not been learned. Instead, a new consensus has emerged in the press, but perhaps especially at this paper. The truth isn't a process of collective discovery, but an orthodoxy already known to an enlightened few whose job it is to inform everyone else. There's no way that's not happening. I mean, at least at the New York Times and with other places as well. I mean, we've covered on our hotlou News Network a few weeks back when the New York Times editorial page editor had to resign over basically printing the viewpoint of an elected United States senator, a viewpoint which probably is a majority opinion of the United States residents. And the staff went so crazy over this that the editorial page editor had to resign. this is not a culture of collective discovery. This is something else. It's much more akin. And I read the Dispatch, which is a center-right sort of anti-Trump mostly collection, which I'd recommend to you because it sort of gives a breadth to how conservatives process things. But one of their chief authors is David French, and he writes that to fully understand what's happening in America right now, you really have to understand an evangelical revival. Basically without the faith. That's kind of what we're going through, and no place better to look at it than the New York Times. And I'm just curious that kind of coming from journalism, what is the I'm not sure how many different experiences you had other than HuffPo, but what is that like? I mean, what is it like in the room with the editors and with the staff? I mean, is this a fair reading? Are we just trying to push an opinion, or are there still objective, like sort of semi or truly objective reporters out there that are just trying to do their best? And how do they interact with the editors?
Yeah, I've written for a lot of places besides Huffington Post. I freelance for Time Magazine and Vox and New York Daily News and pitch stories all over. So first of all, I'll say I read the Dispatch also. I like David French. I've interacted with him quite a number of times. We've exchanged emails and, Twitter DMs and stuff.
That's awesome.
And same with Bari too. I'm Jewish. Bari, I think, has a lot of different views than I do about Israel and about, our relationship, the United States relationship with Israel. And, it's funny to hear you describe her as center left. I would say that she's pretty center right, but, I also think that she's a gay woman who left the Wall Street Journal because they were too pro-Trump and came to the New York Times. And she's saying that she doesn't feel at home there, that her views are rejected out of hand and that she's being bullied in Slack channels. And, I see this stuff on Twitter. I sort of fall in funnily enough, the middle about her letter and her resignation letter. I think there's certainly a lot of truth to what she's saying about the war that's happening inside the New York Times. I think that's 100% real. I think there's a younger, more liberal group of journalists who are at the New York Times now that believe that there is a more moral truth that the paper should be telling, that they don't feel like it's telling. And I think there's an old guard there that's like on its heels a bit. I think that's 100% real.
I just want to bookmark that. We can come back to it. I'm sorry, but isn't that the cleavage? I mean, isn't that the departure? That the more liberal, or as she describes them, and as I would too, very illiberal crowd is essentially, for them, there is a truth that needs to be pushed, and for the old guard, that's not so clear cut.
Yeah, and it's look, my view on that is that you can't. Quote selection in a story is a form of bias. What story you decide to cover is a form of bias. I mean, I think the old guard to sort of mark them is delusional to think that they're not expressing their own bias in how they construct stories. I think they are, and they have to plug Tangle again. I think part of the brilliance of what the newsletter does is that I'm explicitly looking out views that create friction between themselves to give you like a full picture. And I don't think reporters have the liberty to do that in most stories that they're publishing. They're trying to put a narrative together, which often leads you into choices about what stats to include, what quotes to include, what things to leave in, what things to leave out. That can't not be a reflection of your own worldview and your bias. Now, as it relates to Bari, I think that this resignation letter is probably the best thing she's ever written. I totally, I participated in some Bari Weiss dunking on Twitter in the past because I think she's published some stuff that's just been nonsense. And I think that she, is often framing herself as a victim in a way that I don't particularly appreciate. However, I the outlines of the story that she's telling in that letter, I agree. I would describe as chilling. I think that it's scary. I think that someone with her political views, as she, I think, rightly describes them as being center and centrist, should not feel like a sense of fear about what she's going to publish or say or do at the New York Times. And I certainly don't think she should be getting shit on in New York Times Slack channels without any kind of check from, a top editor or an HR person or whatever. I've seen the tweets and the comments her colleagues make about her online, and I think they're gross. And I'm hesitant to embrace the concept of cancel culture. I think there's sort of an old kind of conservative righty concept of the dollar vote. It's like you're saying what you like and what you don't like by where you put your money and your support. And, boycotts and things like that, I don't really have a problem with those. I think people are they're going to express support for things by putting pressure on them if they want to. What I don't think is okay is people shouldn't feel like their jobs are at threat because they want to express an opinion that's a little bit outside the mainstream. That really worries me.
Or well within the mainstream, but
well within the mainstream. Yeah, I mean, I wrote in Tangle, about the Tom Cotton piece, and basically my take on that was I thought that this piece was really unconvincing and stupid, and I think the idea of sending the military into cities would be disastrous. I think that half the country feels the same way Tom Cotton does, and I don't think him suggesting it in the New York Times column matters that much, or is that dangerous, or is even that compelling. I think they should be publishing that stuff. That's why I read the New York Times opinion section, is I want to see views that aren't my own.
So we've had this recurring bit on the show called the Mayor of Wokedale, which I'll have to send you a couple of the bits in the past, because it's really this, totally making fun of woke culture, right? And cancel culture. Maybe the two most famous mayors of Wokedale so far were, I'm sure you saw the Alyssa Milano thing with the Washington Redskins.
Yeah.
That was just precious. And then I really enjoyed actually the Dixie Chicks as well, because I thought that one was amazing. And as well as ironically enough, another country singer with Lady Antebellum now trying to sue and get the Lady A. Did you see that story?
I did not see that, no.
Yeah, so they tried to change their name from Lady Antebellum to Lady A, but it turned out actually a Black folk singer from Seattle has already been performing as Lady A now for 20 years. And so they, in an attempt to signal their wokeness, they end up now trying to steal a name from an activist out of Seattle. Yeah. It was pretty amazing. We've been able to use that as a recurring bit. That's been pretty funny. So I'll share that stuff with you. But before we kind of move on to something else that I want to hit on, you mentioned some in the neighborhood of 15 minutes ago where I wanted to touch on this because it was kind of leading from what I talked about using the word both or multiple perspectives, that I thought and I don't know where Babylon Bee stands in terms of their satirical nature, but this headline has been really sticking with me for a while, because I think this headline is so amazingly genius that, and it hits on something that you were touching on that that I don't even know that it's necessary. What I think is funny about the news and any sort of political reporting in general is not just the dismissive nature of, like you said, once people understand where you're coming from. What I often see, and I think what that headline demonstrates is that once somebody even understands the political position that the writer is coming from, not only do they dismiss what they're writing about, sometimes it assumes, or it creates by like this weird inception that they think the truth is the literal opposite of what the person is writing on. And I think this mask headline kind of demonstrates that, right? Like the joke being that,
to be fair, I mean, just to make sure people understand that may not be familiar with the B, that's a fake headline.
yeah, that was complete satire.
Right.
Yeah.
Good satire.
Yeah. They are, the Babylon Bee is sort of like the right-wing Onion. That's kind of what they're going for, is like the conservative version of the Onion. I find their stuff to be pretty funny sometimes. I think that's a great, I mean, like, and I think that's a good headline. I mean, you know, it's funny, like reading stuff like that. There's so much beneath the surface of something like that. Like you know, there's obviously, my view on Trump's handling of the coronavirus is that it's been a colossal fuck up. And so, you know, I think like I read something like that and I get a chuckle, and then I'm like, you know, it would have been nice if he put a mask on like 5 months ago.
Well, the thing is I saw that headline shared by somebody who I am 99% sure they shared it thinking that it was real.
Oh, really?
Those like, yeah, one of those like not the Onion, but / people being fooled by the Onion thing. So,
yeah.
You know, I don't want to dwell too much on that stuff. I did want to talk a little bit of ultimate stuff, you know, specifically because, you know, the ultimate community in general is, you know, incredibly liberal, right? And so much so that I think that there is this kind of mirror of Wokedale or wokeness that kind of goes above and beyond. And I'll tell a quick story about this, somewhat for you and somewhat for the audience. But and we talked about it a little bit before the show, but we have got a mutual friend, Rob Shapiro, who went to Hopkins High School. I coached him in high school, and he can testify to this. But as I was teaching through the 2000s and coaching through the 2000s, I used to give a physics lesson about the 4 forces acting on a Frisbee to create its flight are gravity, lift, drag, and thrust. And in 2009, I was part of a group that had kind of disbanded the local elite club ultimate team, Flaming Mo, in town. And by 2009, we were trying to regroup with a different set of values. And I was telling that story, and somebody misheard me when we were trying to name the team, and they heard gravity, lift, drag, and thrust, and they heard dragon thrust. And that's how that team name got created. And I'm sure this never saw the light of day, but somewhere around like 2016, after Dragon Thrust had won a world championship and back-to-back national championships in the mixed division, there was a growing sentiment that the Dragon Thrust was some sort of reference to like some sort of sex move. And there was a growing sentiment to cancel the name. And I don't think it ever got close, but it started kind of spreading through the ultimate community. And I'm very curious what your perspective is, because I think you're in New York too, right?
Yeah, I play for Pony and I live in Brooklyn, so.
Yeah. And I think you also have some ties to maybe a slightly more conservative community down in North Carolina, right?
Well, yeah, my brother lives in North Carolina, but I grew up in Bucks County, PA, outside of Philadelphia, which is much more ideologically split. It's actually one of the most politically divided counties in America. It's considered like a bellwether for the national election.
Anyone in politics knows about Bucks County.
Yeah, it's like they like send the CNN crews every election because it's a big deal about like wherever Bucks goes, Pennsylvania goes, wherever PA goes, the election goes. That's kind of what they say.
Okay. So can you give me a sense for what it's been like? Because I have to imagine a big portion of your readers are ultimate players, given your, you've got influence within the ultimate community. It's fair to say. And with that, you've probably got a ton of ultimate readers. And because you dedicate a whole bunch of every day's newsletter towards reporting on the reasonable arguments from the conservative side, do you see the ultimate community kind of, I don't know, maybe reacting negatively to kind of giving that or attempting to give that fairness to that side?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the ultimate community does make up a huge base of my readership, and I'm hesitant to put a number on it, but I would say probably somewhere in the range of like 15 to 20% of my subscribers, maybe 10 to 15% now, are people who are like somehow tied to the Frisbee community, either players or parents or family members of people in the ultimate community. Look, like it's absolutely, of all the social communities that I have, it is the most far left. On the whole, I think like the community is really left, and mostly, the reaction, the response I get is just like lengthy emails, people taking me to task for something that I wrote that they disagree with, and my response to that is like, that's good. We need that. And I often, in my newsletter, I publish feedback from readers almost every day. And I typically focus on publishing the feedback from people.
And for the record, for anybody watching right now that's like considering subscribing, that's like one of the best parts, actually. The fact that you consistently are getting feedback from your readers and then you're taking snippets from it, just like is an additional voice as part of this community. It's awesome.
As someone who almost on a daily basis has to write letters to the editor for behalf of clients, and know exactly what letters to the editor have become. I was reading those over the last few days as I've been getting to know the newsletter better, and kind of going, oh, wow, this is like an actual letter to the editor.
Yeah.
Like it used to be, or maybe that's
well, no, yeah. I mean, and that's like, the idea for it came from real newspapers. I mean, my dad is very liberal, and, he used to write stuff to the New York Times or the Washington Post, our local Bucks County Courier Times, and they would publish them, and they would get real legitimate inches in the paper. And it's one of the things that sort of the digital overthrow of the news has kind of evaporated, is that you don't really see that anymore. And for me, it's super important. I mean, look, like you talk about the issues that are really prominent right now, like I'm not a black man or woman. I don't know what it's like to live in America with dark skin. So when someone writes in to the newsletter about something I wrote on race relations, and they're like, hey, I'm a black guy living in Washington, D.C. Here's what my experience has been like for the last 15 years. That's a really important perspective for me to publish, because like, it's a unique voice. It comes from someone who has a lived experience that I can't relate to. I can maybe imagine it and, put myself in their shoes, but I've never actually been there. And that goes for, this week I touched on abortion and wrote, sort of a kind of pro-choice abortion take on the Supreme Court's ruling. And I mean, I got hammered by Catholics who love the newsletter and read it every day, but felt like their views had been misrepresented. And they were misrepresented. Like I had sort of broad brushed them in a way that wasn't fair to what the majority of Catholics actually feel. So I shared that feedback with everyone and said, like, and I put it at the top of the newsletter. It's like one of the things.
I have to point out, that's a really cool part of the newsletter too, is you've got this running tally of mistakes you've made.
I have another one tomorrow.
Up front, when there's a correction, it's usually kind of high up in the newsletter the next day or a couple days later, whatever. Where if there's a correction in the Star Tribune, our local paper, it's on page D6 at the bottom, and you would never find it. I mean, because it just, and I've thought this about politics for a long time, and I've not seen it practiced very often, so nobody's listening to me. But people make
not yet.
We're human. Yeah, right. We're human. We make mistakes. Have some humility. Humility works. It's okay to basically, and like I say, zero politicians do this. Very few journalists do it. Because there's this sort of like, I don't know where it came from, but there's this sort of holdover where like, if you admit you were wrong, or that you can grow, you have the opportunity to grow as a person by being exposed. Like, hey, I'm a Catholic. What you said about my position on abortion, isn't exactly how we feel about abortion, especially if you get it a number of times. Own it and just sort of say, hey, look, this is what I wrote. I own it. Here's what I've learned since. I probably will modify my take on this somewhat based on what I've learned. That's a really valuable thing.
Yeah.
We joke all the time that we are moments from being canceled by Zuck at any moment. And a couple of weeks ago, Mike, I had mentioned on the show that I had heard somebody say something really, what I found to be really, I don't know if it was prescient or just, there was just so much wisdom behind it. And I tracked down who had said it, because they were like, sometimes somebody being a hypocrite is just them being in the midst of changing. And anyway, to attribute it's to Ethan Klein, the host of my favorite podcast, H3H3, which I couldn't believe I couldn't remember that. But, like Mike and I talk about it constantly on the show, is it's like only a matter of time before somebody becomes a hypocrite and has an opportunity to get canceled. And whether that's because sometimes things stay exactly the same and perspectives change, or sometimes you have to just change your position because you learn something you didn't understand before. And I think one of the things that I think Mike started to say a little bit earlier, that we had somebody on the show a few weeks ago who runs this really large Facebook group and understands media, and understands political media pretty deeply, and apparently has some position that, rather than trying to like push forward news and narrative and pretend it's fair and balanced and even label it fair and balanced, or try to, create some sort of facade that you are, just go the opposite direction and fully disclose where you're coming from. And right. Mike had said this between the two of us. I don't know if he included you on this too, Isaac, but that Tangle's kind of his favorite type of journalism right now. And I have become fully converted to that now too, after I don't know, the last 4 months of consuming this stuff, even to the point where, Ben Shapiro went from like, oh, interesting new person to me, like, when he first started to become popular a few years ago, to becoming somebody I couldn't stand, to now I'm trying to absorb him. And I think specifically because he does straight up say, look, I'm conservative. These are my conservative viewpoints. And I'm okay with that because I can still consume it, understanding these like, gigantic biases. So anyway, that's a 4.5 minute compliment for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate that. And I'm sort of a drum that I've been beating recently, especially on Twitter, which is where like I have my largest following still, is that like, it's like changing your views politically is a virtue. Like, I don't believe that that's something that we should be framing as a negative. Obviously, if you can tie the change in someone's views to a level of political expediency, like they're doing this because they want to get some kind of vote or whatever, then sure, like, of course, let's call bullshit on that. But for the average person, if their views evolve on something, that's a good thing. It means that it means they're not stubborn. They're not stuck in their ways. They're open to new information. I mean, from doing this project and from writing this newsletter, my views have changed on a lot because,
I want to say, sorry to interrupt, Isaac, because another like piece of wisdom that's really stuck with me, because I used to be a gigantic Tim Ferriss fanboy. It's kind of worn off a little bit, but he has these amazing guests who are so wise on his show all the time. And one that stuck with me for a really long time was somebody was on talking about hiring. And I've made this kind of a common practice when I am going into some sort of relationship, whether it's through a vendor or a hiring decision that's kind of semi-permanent or partnership, is the question is, when is the last time you changed your mind about something very important? And if that person says, I haven't, to your point, Isaac, like it's such a great virtue to be able to change like this closely and strongly held belief when you're presented with new information. I think it is one of these like incredibly virtuous things. And I don't know, I'm picking it up on the newsletter when I read it every day. And
I love that. And I love that you're open to that. And also that what's what's so missing in today's 98% of today's news is nuance. That it isn't A or B. It's never A or B. You know, that even within A, let's call A the conservatives, there's maybe 14 different competing values that are being fought over, and Trump does something, therefore conservatives X, and it's just like, well, that's just so, it's so ridiculous, and people don't work that way. Groups of people don't work that way. Find a group of people who believe the same thing, or the same 10 things. Put it that way. There's a saying in politics that if you want to agree with your elected officials 100% of the time, run for office yourself, and even that will fail, because if you're a good person who's open to learning new things, you'll probably evolve, or at least add a level of nuance to your level of thinking. And anyway, we're just turning into Isaac Saul fanboys here, Lou.
No, I mean, look, it's a good, I think it's like a really good message for the moment. And, to your point, and to tie it back into the first thing we started talking about the tagline, I actually had a reader who wrote in and said he thought my tagline should be news with nuance, which I really loved.
Oh, wow.
And I thought about that a little bit. But, to the forgiveness point too, like there's a really lefty writer named Elizabeth Brunig who, I can't remember, I think it was on Twitter. She said something about how just like, the culture of accountability that we're living in right now is not tenable if we don't also pair it with like a level of forgiveness for people who are willing to come forward and say, I messed up and I'm sorry. And she's like way left of me. I mean, she's like as far left as you can get. And she's sort of looking around saying like, I love what we're doing as a progressive movement. We're holding people accountable. We're holding brands and corporations accountable. Like, we have the power of the purse. We have the influence on social media. We have celebrities who are backing us up. And there's something really powerful about that, especially when you're going after like a noble goal or something that you believe is a noble goal. But if someone comes forward and responds to like something they wrote 10 years ago when they were 17, and they say like, I'm really sorry, I was an idiot, I've learned a lot since then, and like I've engaged with people who have made me broaden my perspective on the world, then I think they should be forgiven, and I think they should be given some level of redemption. There has to be an opportunity for redemption, or else there's nothing there. And I've written about this myself. Like, I'm 29. When I was in middle school, like calling something gay because you didn't like it was just something everyone did. All my friends did that. And where I lived, where I grew up, that was just something that was really common. And I did it too. And I'm ashamed of that. And I feel guilty about that. And it lasted until I was, 15, 16 years old. So I have, I get Facebook memories sometimes that pop up of like a comment where I'm like, dude, you're so gay about something like online. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, this is A, so embarrassing. And I can't believe I was such an idiot. And B, like, could ruin me. And to me, I think about like the growth that I've had and the people, the gay and trans people in my life who have like helped me see why that kind of language was so destructive and damaging. And the mentors that I've had who like smacked me upside the head a couple of times and were like, you're an idiot. Stop saying that kind of stuff. And I like really learned from it. And now I have younger cousins or friends or people in my community who I'm like sort of a guiding post on, hey, like, you sound like an idiot when you say something really ignorant like that. And it's selfish, and it certainly comes from a place of privilege or whatever, but like, I think I should be granted for forgiveness for that based on the growth that I've made and like the place that I'm in now. But I don't know if I would be if those things were to become like public.
There's something about being confronted with mistakes you made when you were younger, because we used to just sort of accept that young people make mistakes, and growing to adulthood that's the direction, or that's the direction it's supposed to go in, right? Where that you're confronted with different challenges and you become a better person. Lou's and my favorite high school humanities teacher gave us the concept of the schema, which is sort of your being, right? And like if something slams into your schema, it's warped and distorted for a while, but then eventually it just sort of forms back into the same ball, maybe a little bit bigger. And now I'm me plus the thing I just learned. And to have a conversation with your 16-year-old self, or for me, my 26-year-old self, would be, we wouldn't agree on a lot of things. And I would have to challenge some premises that I held at that time. That's okay. That's normal. What you said though was, which is terrifying, terrifies me. I mean, just as a longtime passionate, really kind of probably extremist on the First Amendment, is you shouldn't be nervous about your job. You shouldn't be nervous about your livelihood. That is not a thing you should have to worry about in a free country. And those values are so deep into what I learned America was all about, that I can't believe we're sitting here having this conversation, that you can be canceled in that way. For something you said. I mean, maybe you wrote an op-ed about it 20 years ago.
You know, it's if it's any consolation, Isaac, it's funny now that we're kind of speaking to big part of the ultimate community here too, is I made a gigantic mistake 16 years ago that I know even knew at the time I screwed up. I was one of the guys in that like 2 or 3 year window who faked his eligibility to play college ultimate, and I got caught. And I kid you not, it is now, I guess it's been 10 months now. Somebody just would not let it go playing ultimate. And this happened, 16 years ago, and people are not kind of letting it go. And the opportunity for forgiveness, I think, also, lands squarely underneath that like virtuous opportunity. And, I worry about it all the time. Like, I don't even know if I'm on a Grandmasters team now. And I don't even know if my teammates know. And if they found out, like, are they going to kick me off the team? Like, every team that I like now join, where it's been like 16 years, where maybe somebody doesn't know, are they going to kick me off a team when they find out?
Yeah, I mean, look, and I think there's like a really notable middle ground that I try and stand on issues like this. I guess like to be left of, or maybe in a different place than Mike is, like someone like Bari Weiss, for instance, like I think if what she's saying she experienced in her workplace is accurate, and I have every reason to believe it is, I think that Bari Weiss is like a decent person, and I think that she's mostly honest. I think she's made some crappy political arguments before, but like, I don't have any reason to doubt her based on what I know about her, like in explaining her experience there. And that's like totally wrong. Bari Weiss publishes a story on Twitter and she gets like ratioed to hell, and everybody's like, this story sucks and you're an idiot and your argument sucks. I'm fine with that. Like that to me, that a lot of the times gets like labeled as cancel culture. People are like, oh, cancel culture, like no free speech. I'm like, no, like we have free speech. The people who are ratioing you are exercising their free speech, and you're eating shit because you said something dumb. And so that sucks. But like the issue to me is, what we're seeing recently in the last few months is there are a lot of experiences where people are like, their livelihoods are being really damaged. I mean, one really famous one that I was just reading about was a guy who is like he's not a political guy. He's a nobody in terms of like the media press world. He's not like some verified Twitter account. He was some dude driving his car to work and hanging his hand out the window. He's like a construction worker. And some like liberal activist took a picture of him because he said that he was like making the okay white supremacist sign or whatever.
Oh, fancy Moses, this thing.
Yeah, and they posted it on Twitter, and somebody ID'd the guy on Twitter, and he lost his job. He got fired from his job, and he got interviewed. There was like this really powerful interview where they're like asking him about it, and he's like, I literally have no idea what, like, I didn't even know what I was being accused of. Like the guy like didn't have a Twitter account. He's like wasn't like a political person. He was just like, I got called in my office and I just was blown away by what was happening. And like that to me, that's the stuff that I'm like really concerned about and worried about in the cancel culture, is like when we are like, assuming the worst of just these regular people who get caught up in like a viral video or picture or whatever, and we don't have the additional context of what's going on. You know, and I say that as someone who, like, I have a public profile, and I understand that the mob might come for me one day, and they have before, if I say something stupid. And that's like the price I pay for having the platform that I have. And I'm comfortable with that. That's like an exchange that we have. You know, I'm way more worried about people who are like regular people, not in this space, not political, not journalists, not in the media world, who are getting, you know, having their lives upended, often in, you know, by a mob that misidentifies them. They have the wrong person, or they draw intent from something that wasn't really there. That's kind of what.
Yeah. Would you say doxing is bad?
Yeah, I would say doxing is bad.
We did a whole episode on that about a month ago or so.
Yeah,
oh, here we go. I saw this one too. This is crazy.
I haven't read into this, so maybe she's a piece of trash. I don't know, but everything I read, there's a girl in Texas who lost her father over the weekend. Her father was a cop, and she posted what I saw to be a very touching tribute to her father, and with the hashtag Blue Lives Matter, which of course yielded a result that, in some of the tweets, I mean, are just the most horrific things you could say to somebody who lost, period.
Yeah, I mean, and even if you skipped like the most abhorrent stuff, and in case you didn't see it, Isaac, that, you know, like they're both, a bunch of them are just like, glad your dad's dead. That's the obviously abhorrent ones. The ones that are in that gray area, which I think are far more destructive, that, you know, maybe people think that there's gray area, are the ones that say things like, don't you understand the climate right now? You shouldn't be talking about this right now. Not realizing, like, the only time to talk, or not the only time, the most appropriate time to talk about losing your father is in the days after you lost your father. It's pretty rough times. Well, we've complimented you enough. I'm tired. I'm hopeful I can cancel you later this week, Isaac. But in the meantime,
this podcast might do the trick, man. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. We know we're on borrowed time here, so we appreciate you coming on before we got canceled. But in the meantime, you know, I think the obvious answer to people on how they can help you is they subscribe by going to tangle.substack.com, which we will throw in the show notes, as well as the comments on these posts here, so people can do that. But is there anything else, the lunatics here, which we call our viewers the lunatics, is there anything that they can do to help or support your cause or the actual newsletter?
Look, yeah, I mean, subscribing to the newsletter is definitely the best thing to do, and it's really my only ask. And I think, you know, my pitch for it and what I tell people is, like, if you really want to broaden your views and take in a lot of perspectives that are going to challenge you, and also hear arguments that might reinforce the stance you already have, in like a really coherent, concise way, I think that's what I offer. And, you know, I'm really proud of the fact that my newsletter has been endorsed by tons of progressive lefties in the ultimate community, the far left people, and also like far right Trump supporters in New Hampshire and South Carolina, who have posted publicly that they really like the newsletter, even though they don't disagree with my views, generally speaking, or they don't agree with my views, generally speaking. And so that's my pitch, is that, like, I think I've really built something that, like, a lot of people across the spectrum can appreciate and find value in. And, you know, I hope it sort of builds some understanding between the two sides and the polarization, because that's sort of like the ultimate end goal for me.
And it's easily achieved. I've become a big fan. What I meant to put, one of my favorite things about the newsletter is he starts out by saying, today's newsletter today's read 11 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I get all these emails and I'm like, all right, I can budget 11 minutes to take a look at this.
I'm glad you say that. The read time is a hot point of controversy in the newsletter, because some people are like, dude, this took me 20 minutes to read. And I'm like, I got some bad news for you, man. Like,
I'm one of those people, by the way. Well, I know you were about to ask what you can do for us. So, if you could deliver MKBHD to come on the show, we'd really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, I'll shoot him a message after this. If he responds to me, I'll put in an ask of my own.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we hear across the board. All right. Well, thank you so much, Isaac, for joining us and talking in depth about ultimate community stuff. What you're doing with Tangle again is amazing. And maybe we'll have you back on after the election. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would love that. That'd be a blast.
Awesome. Well, thanks again to all the lunatics for tuning in. I am your host, hotlou.
I am proud that journalism isn't dead, Mike Franklin.
We'll talk